On This Week in Enterprise Tech, we talk about a lot of security vulnerabilities happening in this week's news. Plus, Brian talks about a Bluetooth exploit. Curtis talks about a TCP/IP stack vulnerability. We all go on a rant about how you should be securing your data in databases. Shouldn't miss it. TWiET on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiET.
This is TWiET, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 356, recorded August 23rd, 2019. Vulnerabilities that shouldn't have happened. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Worldwide Technology. Worldwide Technology's Advanced Technology Center is like no other testing and research lab with more than $500 million of equipment, including solutions from key partners like Intel Corporation, and it's virtual, so you can access it 24/7. To learn more and get insights into all that it offers, go to wwt.com/twit. And by Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage. Thinking about moving your data storage to the cloud? Wasabi is enterprise-class cloud storage at 1/5 the price of Amazon S3 and up to 6 times faster with no hidden fees for egress or API calls. Calculate your savings and try Wasabi with free unlimited storage for a month at wasabi.com. Code Enterprise. Welcome to TWiET, This Week in Enterprise Tech, the show that is dedicated to you, the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and that geek who just wants to know how this world is connected. I'm your host, Louis Maresca, your guide through this big, giant world of the enterprise, but I definitely can't guide you by myself. Let's bring in the experts, starting with our very own Mr. Curtis Franklin, senior editor at Dark Reading. Curtis, now that your traveling slowed down, what have you been working on? What's keeping you busy?
Well, I'm actually staying busy with, some new responsibilities at Dark Reading. I'm going to be doing more and more feature writing, so getting deeper into some topics rather than just going ahead and doing the daily news grind. So I'm looking forward to that. First piece is already out. I did an interview with the CIO of the Haas Formula One team. He's also the CIO for the Stewart-Haas NASCAR team.
Fantastic. There's Curtis. I was going to say, I'm definitely not Curtis. So that's, but Curtis, that's great to hear. Yeah, I think that sounds interesting. We'll have to keep an eye out for that. My son's actually started just getting into watching NASCAR, so that might be an interesting thing for me to read to them. So we'll have to see.
Absolutely.
Cool. Of course, well, we have to bring in our next co-host in crime, and that's the director of Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu, our geek in paradise, Mr. Brian Chee. G-Bert, it's great to have you back, man. What's keeping you busy as well?
The joys of being a researcher on 100% soft money. I am scrambling to try and find funding in this home stretch to retirement. But in the meantime, I'm exploring all kinds of really cool things. Like I'm actually working on trying to set some standards and policies and so forth for the campus card key system. We are finally getting out of the dark ages and looking at going to card keys for a lot of the buildings and labs instead of these really expensive laser cut keys. So ought to be interesting.
Fantastic. Well, speaking of busy, we have quite the jam-packed show today. So let's get busy now, because we're going to cover a bunch of interesting topics, not only security and privacy issues, but also we're talking a little about a Bluetooth exploit and weakness, a TCP/IP stack vulnerability, plus securing your data and databases. But before we get into all that goodness, let's go ahead and jump into this week's blips. Well, we've heard about a bunch of acquisitions happening in the enterprise market. There's been tons of that going on, but it's almost an acquisition binge in some companies. And the latest news comes from VMware. Now, they just announced they're actually acquiring Carbon Black and Pivotal for a possible total amount of $4.8 billion. Now, to put it more into perspective here, VMware's revenue only last quarter was $2.44 billion. So this is quite the cash spend, if you ask me. Now, this comes just after their acquisition of Bitnami earlier this year. Now, that's only a fraction of the $15.7 billion Salesforce just spent on Tableau, but it might be just as impactful. Now, what is VMware trying to promote with these acquisitions? Well, Pivotal focuses on building modern applications thanks to its Cloud Foundry heritage and recently added support for Kubernetes. Now, while Carbon Black provides the security features necessary to secure modern applications and infrastructures. Now, what VMware is actually hoping is that it will solve two critical areas: building modern enterprise-grade applications and protecting enterprise workloads and clients. Now, will hopefully accelerate their subscription and SaaS offerings and expand their ability to enable customers' digital transformations. Now, especially with the Carbon Black announcement, this will help for more seamless integration of cloud-native endpoint protection interweaved in VMware's control points. Now, Pivotal brings a brand new developer platform to VMware as well, and then it makes it easier for developers to write, test, and deploy their applications. Now, it's a smart move that helps VMware complete its story, which is actually typically focused on providing infrastructure over actual development tools. What will be interesting to see in the coming months is how this enhances Kubernetes adoption and ensure VMware is at the helm driving it.
Well, you know, a lot of stereotypes have just a little bit of truth at the base, and the Nigerian scammer is one of those. I say that because 80 individuals have been charged in a massive business email compromise bust. 80 people, as I said, mostly Nigerian nationals, have been charged for their roles in a massive and complex fraud operation that attempted to steal $46 million in business email compromise, or BEC, and romance scams, according to the U.S. Department of Justice, in a 252-count federal grand jury indictment unsealed on August 22nd. The October 18th indictment alleges that 80 defendants, as I said, mostly Nigerian nationals, used BEC fraud, romance scams, and schemes targeting the elderly to defraud victims out of millions in a scheme that ran from 2014 through 2018. The indictment includes descriptions of more than 440 overt acts conducted in the operation, including details of fraudulent wire transfers and cash withdrawals affecting different victims. Co-conspirators regularly filed fake business name statements with the LA County Registrar or Recorder's Office that were presented to banks to open fraudulent accounts. Now, each of the 80 defendants is charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to launder money, and aggravated identity theft. Some also face substantive fraud and money laundering charges, and 7 are charged with operating illegal money transmitting businesses. BEC is a growing problem for businesses and consumers. Last summer, the FBI reported BEC fraud had cost $12 billion in losses to organizations around the world since 2013.
Well, I hate to do doom and gloom, but the sad part is an Ars Technica article, basically headlines: the year-long rash of supply chain attacks against open source is getting worse. So the first backdoor to come to light was in Webmin, a web-based administration tool with more than 1 million installations. Sometime around April of last year, according to Webmin developer Jamie Cameron, someone compromised the server used to develop new versions of the program. The attacker then used the access to distribute a backdoor that was downloaded more than 900,000 times and may have been actively used by tens of thousands of internet-facing servers. The unknown attacker made a subtle change to the Webmin script called password_change.cgi. The change gave attackers the ability to send a command through a special URL that an infected Webmin server would then execute with root privileges. In version 1.890, which had more than 421,000 downloads between June 2018 and the last weekend, the backdoor was turned on by default. On versions 1.90, 1.91, and 1.92, which collectively had more than 942,000 downloads, the backdoor was active only when admins changed the default setting that allowed expired passwords to be changed. Backdoored versions were distributed on SourceForge, which is the primary distribution source for the Webmin website. The compromise of Webmin and Ruby Gems libraries are only the latest supply chain attacks to hit open source software. Most people don't think twice about installing software or updates from the official site of a known developer. As developers continue to make software and websites harder to exploit, black hats over the past years have increasingly exploited this trust to spread malicious wares by poisoning code at its source. Well, at issue is the way open source leverages community contributions and an inherent trust in those volunteers that help OSS make such a huge feature leap. What occurs to me is that while the big boys in the software business have long fought the battle of closed software versus open source, that perhaps we've been beating on them a bit too hard and are now reaping what we have sown as far as security holes and vulnerabilities introduced by bad players contributing to the OSS world.
Do you ever wonder what sites are actually tracking you? Well, it's sometimes scary to go on Facebook and see those ads to the side there about things that you've actually looked at elsewhere during that day, or if you actually talked about that day. Well, Farhad Manjoo from the New York Times went on a quest this year to figure out how much he's being followed across the web. Now, to frame it up, he installed a version of Firefox that logged not only the sites he visited, but also the advertising tracking services that were watching the sites he surfed. Now, what did he find out? I bet you'll be surprised as a daily web server. It was that everything you do online is logged in an obscene detail and that you have no privacy. Shocking, right? Well, he actually didn't have to visit any shady sites or do any odd searches. He just had to venture somewhere, anywhere really, and he was watched. Now, I probably have your curiosity at a point here, but what actually got captured is interesting. Let's start with the fact that advertising.com found that his exact location using his longitude and latitude from his IP address. Now, tracking scripts like this, from Twitter, actually allows websites to add useful features like share buttons and other things. But that script also often doubles as trackers meant to record site visits and build profiles about users. In this case, Twitter can use the information about the page to suggest new followers or sell more targeted advertising. Now, what's been found out is that servers are actually given a unique ID in some cases. Now, in the case of this particular unique ID for Farhad, it was actually created by AppNexus. Now, what this did was allowed all trackers sharing that ID to track his activity. Now, this particular ID was shared with nearly a dozen trackers in advertising, including Amazon, Yahoo, Google, and lesser-known companies like SpotX and Quantcast. Now, even when a tracking ID was not used, fingerprinting was. Now, this means that the size of his screen or the screen resolution, his operating system information, and his browser information were also used as a unique ID across the sites. What were the worst offenders? Well, news sites and Google and Facebook. Surprise, right? Now, it sounds like the future of tech, of the web, will need to focus more on privacy and ensure users don't feel so, well, tracked.
Well, IBM has announced quantum safe encryption. IBM researchers this week announced development of new quantum-safe encryption techniques that they plan to deploy to the IBM public cloud in 2020. Techniques have also been prototyped as part of a quantum-safe enterprise-class tape storage system. Now, according to the announcement, the new encryption algorithms are based on algebraic lattices, a class of mathematical problems that make my head hurt when I try to fully understand them. But they've been studied since the mid-1980s and haven't yet been shown to be susceptible to algorithmic analysis. And that includes being not susceptible to quantum computing solutions. The algorithms are implemented in the cryptographic suite for algebraic lattices, or crystals, a collection based on two primitives, Kyber, a secure key encapsulation mechanism, and dilithium, a secure digital signature algorithm. IBM has donated the quantum-safe algorithms to openquantumsafe.org for developing additional open standards and has submitted all these algorithms to NIST for standardization.
Okay, so this story is actually a follow-up on the 37-hour outage last December 2018. So CenturyLink's nationwide 37-hour outage in December of 2018 disrupted 911 service for millions of Americans and prevented completion of at least 886 calls to 911, according to a Federal Communications Commission report. Quote, back in December, FCC Chairman Ajit Pai called the outage of CenturyLink's fiber network completely unacceptable and vowed to investigate. The FCC released the findings from its investigation the other day, describing how CenturyLink failed to follow best practices that could have prevented the outage. At that time, Pi hasn't announced a punishment. The outage was so extensive that it affected numerous other network operators that connected to CenturyLink, including Comcast and Verizon, according to that FCC report. The FCC summary said, quote, "The outage affect communications service providers, business customers, and consumers who relied upon CenturyLink's transport services, which route communications traffic from various providers to locations across the country. The outage resulted in extensive disruptions to phone and broadband service, including 911 calling. As many as 22 million customers across 39 states were affected, including approximately 17 million customers across 29 states who lacked reliable access to 911. At least 886 calls to 911 were not delivered." So the 37-hour outage began on December 27th and, quote, "was caused by an equipment failure that was exacerbated by a network configuration error," according to the FCC. CenturyLink estimates that more than 12.1 million phone calls on its network were, quote, "blocked or degraded due to the incident," according to the FCC. So what bothers me is how CenturyLink supposedly follows similar practices to how Ma Bell, AT&T, deploys patches, updates, and changes. So as part of that, there's a whole series of steps. Just ask some of our friends in the chat room that work for AT&T. You have to do a whole bunch of proposals. It has to be reviewed. It has to be double checked. It has to actually be tried against a draft system. Then there's a whole checklist of what you need to check once the patch or upgrade or change has been made, and there has to be rollback procedures in place. So it's all known. You know, there's a lot of things. CenturyLink likes to copy a lot of the AT&T Ma Bell procedures because a lot of their employees came from that world. But I kind of wonder what's going on. So why did they miss the testing phase of the rollout? That could have caught the malformed packet issue, because that's really what the network configuration error was. So my big question to CenturyLink is, has the constant pressure to reduce operational costs push even a company as big as CenturyLink into cutting dangerous corners?
We'll have to see. We'll have to see. Well, we've talked a lot about privacy here on TWiET, and I just mentioned an exciting story about web surfing trackers. Now, it seems like Google might be playing a bit of both sides of the aisle. Now, just this week, Google has announced a new initiative to develop a set of open standards to enhance privacy on the web fundamentally. Now, they're calling it Privacy Sandbox, and what Google claims is that the technology developed for publishers and advertisers to make advertising more relevant for people has been used far beyond its original intent. Now, in their post, Google calls out like blocking cookies really isn't enough this day and age because it encourages opaque techniques like using fingerprinting. Now, as you know, developers have found ways to use tiny bits of information that vary between users, such as the device they have or what fonts they're using installed to generate a unique identifier, which can then be used to match the user across websites. Now, unlike cookies, users cannot clear their fingerprints, so that's a big problem. Now, on the flip side, they're calling out blocking cookies removes the ability to deliver relevant advertising and actually hurting publishers' revenue streams. Now, this is where the new initiative wants to jump in. Now, Google is going to work with the web community to develop new standards that advance privacy while continuing to support free access to content. Now, some of the ideas coming out of the initiative already includes a new approach to ensuring that ads continue to be relevant for users, but user data shared with websites and advertisers would be minimized by anonymously aggregating user information and keeping more and more user information on the device only. Now, the main goal is to create a set of standards that is consistent with the user's expectations of privacy. Now, what is evident here is that Google Chrome will most likely adopt these standards a lot faster, but they're actually also hoping that since it becomes a standard, the other browsers will follow suit as well. Now, to me, I like the transparency coming from Google here. They actually see the advantages and the disadvantages on both sides. Now, let's hope they can shift the web to benefit both of them as well. Well, folks, that does it for the blips. Next up, the bites. But before we get to the bites, we have to thank a really great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is Worldwide Technology. Now, if you ever get a chance to visit the Worldwide Technology's Advanced Technology Center, you should definitely go because it is a truly amazing site. Now, to begin building it 10 years ago, it has really grown exponentially, and it's really like no other testing and research lab you've ever seen. Now, listen to what it contains. The lab contains more than $500 million in equipment. This includes systems from hundreds of OEMs and key partners ranging from high-tech heavyweights like Intel, Dell EMC, HPE, Cisco, to actually emerging disruptors like Equinix. Now, WWT is a trusted partner. It actually stays with you over the years. Many customers have been with them for over a decade because they know that WWT is where they can go to get the answers they need to make sure their business runs right. Now, right with all that has to offer, the ATC really is an incubator for IT innovation. Now, listen to what it has to offer. Hundreds of on-demand and schedulable labs representing the newest advances in multi-cloud technology and architecture, artificial intelligence, IoT solutions, and including the latest solutions based on Intel like FPGA acceleration, Intel Select solutions like VMware vSAN Labs, and cutting-edge solutions based on Intel's second-generation Xeon scalable processor, and the latest Optane data center persistent memory. A lot of great stuff. Now, plus, there are hundreds of labs to explore, including multi-cloud, hyper-converged infrastructure, networking, secondary storage, data analytics, AI, and more. I can go on and on about all the things they offer. Sometimes you might want to try and build projects before you know what the industry has to offer to help. While the ATC can help you learn about the products before you launch. Now, the WWT's engineers use these environments to quickly spin up proof of concepts and pilots using the sandboxes so customers can confidently select the best solutions. Now, in many cases, this reduces concept to time from months to weeks, which actually increases your speed to market. Now, they also offer a lab as a service. It's a dedicated lab space within the ATC. Now, here customers can actually perform programmatic testing using the vast technology ecosystem that WWT has to offer and that it has built. Now, it's virtual, so you can take it full advantage of ATC's unique benefits anywhere in the world, 24/7. Now, WWT engineers work in these labs every day. They beta test new edge-to-cloud solutions based on the latest and greatest Intel technologies, and they're building reference architectures and custom integrations to help their customers make decisions and see results faster and with much less investment. Now, many have been eagerly waiting, and the time is finally here. WWT has finally launched their new digital platform encompassing the ATC ecosystem. The ecosystem creates a multiplier effect of knowledge, speed, agility, anytime, anywhere around the world for their customers. Get access to articles, case studies, hands-on labs, and other tools that make the difference in today's fast-paced world. To learn more about WWT and gain access to their ATC ecosystem, go to wwt.com/TWiET and create an account today. WWT simplifies the complex. That's wwt.com/TWiET. WWT delivering business and technology outcomes around the world. And we thank Worldwide Technology for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's that time of the show. We get into the bites. And for today's bite, we're actually going to start with Chee. We're going to jump into some topics about potential vulnerabilities. Is that right?
Okay, so this attack, I do need to stress the word potential. So far, it has not been found in the wild. It is a bunch of researchers demonstrating a weakness in the Bluetooth wireless standard that could allow hackers to intercept keystrokes, address books, and other sensitive data sent from billions of devices. So this whole thing is called, the process that's vulnerable is called key negotiation of Bluetooth, or knob for short. The attack forces two or more devices to choose an encryption key just a single byte in length before establishing a Bluetooth connection. Attackers within radio range can then use commodity hardware to quickly crack the key. From there, attackers can use the crack key to decrypt data passing between the devices. The types of data susceptible could include keystrokes passing between a wireless keyboard and computer, address books uploaded from a phone or car dashboard, or photographs exchanged between phones. Knob does not require an attacker to have any previously shared secret material or to observe the pairing process of the targeted devices, which is how the WEP and some of the Wi-Fi encryption standards were broken. This exploit is invisible to Bluetooth apps and the operating systems they run on, making the attack almost impossible to detect without highly specialized equipment. Knob also exploits a weakness in the Bluetooth standard itself. That means in all likelihood that the vulnerability affects just about every device that's compliant with the specification. The researchers have simulated the attack on 14 different Bluetooth chips, including those from Broadcom, Apple, and Qualcomm, and found all of them to be vulnerable. So highlighted in the article, it says, quote, "The key negotiation of Bluetooth knob attack exploits a vulnerability at the architectural level of Bluetooth." The researchers wrote in a research paper published just this week. The vulnerable encryption key negotiation protocol endangers potentially all standard compliant Bluetooth devices, regardless of their Bluetooth version number and implementation details. We believe that the encryption key negotiation protocol has to be fixed as soon as possible. So anyway, while the Bluetooth Special Interest Group, the SIG, the body that oversees the wireless standard, works to provide a fix, a handful of companies have released software updates that patch or mitigate the vulnerability, which is tracked as CVE-2019-9506. Those with fixes include Microsoft Windows, yay Lou, Apple Mac OS, iOS and watchOS, Google for Android, Cisco IP phones and the WebEx system, and BlackBerry-powered Android phones. The U.S. CERT has issued this advisory. The Bluetooth Special Interest Group, meanwhile, posted a security notice, and I'm going to read it. It's headlined Glaring Weaknesses. The attack targets glaring weaknesses in the key setup process that occurs just prior to two devices connecting. The Bluetooth specification allows keys to have lengths of as many as 16 bytes or as few as 1 byte. The lower limit, the researcher said, was put in place in part to comply with international encryption regulations. The result, all Bluetooth-compliant devices are required to negotiate the length of the key they will use to encrypt the connection. A master device may start out proposing a 16-byte key, and the slave device may respond that it's only capable of using a 1-byte key. With that, the key will be downgraded to a size that's trivial to crack using brute force techniques, which attempt to guess every possible combination until the correct one is found. As if that wasn't bad enough, this key length negotiation, which occurs over something known as the Link Manager Protocol, isn't encrypted or authenticated. The negotiation is also completely opaque to apps and OSs. As a result, the key encrypting the keystrokes and other sensitive data may be protected by a trivially cracked 1-byte key with no easy way for a user to even know. So we need to thank the researchers, Danielle Antonelli of Singapore University of Technology and Design, Niels Ole Tiphauer of CISPA Helmholtz Center for Information Security, and Casper B. Rasmussen with the University of Oxford have devised two attack variants to exploit these weaknesses. The first is a remote technique in which the attacker uses a custom Bluetooth device to perform an active man-in-the-middle attack on the two connecting devices. The researchers call these devices Alice and Bob. The goal of the man-in-the-middle attack caused the devices to agree on a 1-byte key, as noted. Anyway, we can go on and on and on. But the reality is Bluetooth, when I went to some of the original SIG meetings, had lofty pie-in-the-sky goals. And Ericsson, who was a big pusher behind this whole thing, was bragging about how secure the encryption was. Unfortunately, it sounds like someone, somewhere, in some sort of government institution, managed to go and say, no, you've got to have it less. So my comment is, gee, didn't the Bluetooth folks learn from mistakes made in the Wi-Fi world? And are we making this too easy? So Curt, let's toss this first to you and say, does this give you the willies? Is this going to be a problem in the enterprise?
Well, I certainly think it could be a problem in the enterprise. The real issue, though, is that this is one of those things that's reminiscent of what we've seen in everything from Spectre and Meltdown to some of the BGP exploits. This is an issue in the basic protocol. That means that it's not really, easily patched. What you're having to do is patch around the protocol rather than doing something to fix a problem that happened as the protocol was implemented. And I think it's worth noting that the real weakness here, the 1 byte key, came about because some governments required that as part of meeting their regulations on strong encryption. And the reason I say it's worth noting that is because we have people in our government right now who are eager to force companies to put backdoors, otherwise known as intentional vulnerabilities, in their encryption schemes for law enforcement purposes. Once you do that, it's going to ultimately be exploited. No ifs, ands, or buts. This is a good example of that, and a warning for future regulators pretty much everywhere.
So I think let's toss this next comment to Lou. And so, Mr. Maresca, just how hard is it nowadays? We used to be sensitive about encryption. We needed to go and have encryption processors and all this. But from a programmer standpoint, 1 byte versus 16 bytes, it's not very different as far as from a programmer standpoint anymore, is it?
We have such scalable storage nowadays. It really isn't. I mean, a lot of organizations, they pay very specific attention to that when it comes to sharding their databases or scaling their databases out or their storage. But most of the time nowadays, which is actually a really good thing to do, is to store your data in a separate place, separate location. And so you usually have different quotas and things for that. And when you're talking about localized applications, yeah, it's so easy to do nowadays with bcrypt and other kind of libraries that support it. There's no reason why it shouldn't be done out of the box when you're building a new application or even when you're upgrading its solutions. So I don't see that there's a really excuse here other than the fact that they're paying more attention to innovation and the technology behind it than they really worried about adding the layer. Now, adding a layer of complexity, because I really think that security and encryption does add a layer of complexity to things and can sometimes slow down innovation. But in the same sense, it should be interweaved into the design and development and implementation process. So I don't necessarily think it's a really good excuse, but these things happen, and we're starting to see that a lot with IoT devices, and now we're even seeing it with even lower level components like Bluetooth.
Yeah, and one of the things that really occurs to me is that we've got, Tom, Dick, and Harriet. Let's be even here. Almost everybody on Earth uses Bluetooth devices now, to varying levels of success. And I think one of the reasons why is they've become more and more and more easy to set up. Have we gone too far? Should we be having things like QR codes for, strong encryption keys that are unique to the device or something like that, so that we can do the setups in a more secure manner, maybe an RFID, tap and go, or QR code. this is more, I think, well, one, politics. Two, I think maybe we're also crippling these devices by making them too easy to set up. Anyone want to take a comment on that?
Well,
I think. Go ahead, Kurt.
No, you go, Lou. You probably had something more intelligent than I to say.
I doubt it. I all I was going to say is that I think these things are kind of readily available on some other platforms, and I think politics does come into effect. I think also sometimes the organizations they start at the minimal side. They started what the least thing they could possibly do in order to get to market or to ship something. Before they go and say, okay, now it's time to us to pay more attention to these other things. It's less of a horizontal, and it's more considered a vertical. And I think that's where the issue resides. I think they need to pay more attention up front, spend more time and spend more money on it up front, and then we'll have less of these problems kind of leaking out and spreading the web. But that would be my only comment there.
Curt, you had a comment?
Sure.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things, Brian, you were talking about making it a little bit more difficult, maybe putting in a couple of additional steps for authenticating Bluetooth devices to one another. What this all comes down to, user interface issues and what we like to call friction differential when it comes to security. Basically, you want to make it as difficult as possible for criminals to interrupt the signal, interrupt the transmission, and as easy as possible for legitimate users to do so. And what designers have done consistently is go strongly toward making the interaction for the end user as close to invisible as possible. And unfortunately, that invisibility has also provided a cloak of invisibility to the attackers. When the attacker understands the system better than the people who are designing the applications, that's when you end up with real problems. And that's what we see time after time after time.
Well, we're just going to have to learn our lessons. Obviously, the folks in the Wi-Fi Alliance have learned it with WEP, and then the original WPA. Well, maybe we're going to have to start having yet another Bluetooth standard that fixes this, and hopefully it gets pushed through quickly. Anyway, we've got another bite coming up that's yet more doom and gloom, and this time we're gonna toss it to Curt. And he's going to be talking about VxWorks, which is actually one of the most popular commercial embedded system operating systems on Earth, actually. And he's going to tell us all about it.
Thanks, Brian. It was a couple of months back that a vulnerability was found in the VxWorks TCP IP stack. This was big news for companies in the OT, or operational technology. Think of it as industrial IoT world, but it really didn't make the radar screen of an awful lot of companies. Well, a new report that came out last week is trying to put some dollars to what this vulnerability might cost. And I think that's going to get the attention of many more companies. Now, the reason is simple. Brian, you mentioned that VxWorks is probably the world's most popular embedded system, operating system. That tends to make it the world's most popular invisible operating system. There are thousands of companies that might have hundreds of copies of VxWorks running within their network, and they don't know it. Why not? Because it's running on machinery that can range from firewalls and routers up to large industrial process control systems. It just never appears with a big splashy screen that says VxWorks. Most of the devices don't have a big runs on VxWorks sticker on the side. And so these companies don't know they're vulnerable until something happens to exploit that vulnerability. Now, the report that I read is from a company called Cover. That's Kovrr. It's a firm that does risk analysis for the insurance industry. And they found that there are some of the largest manufacturing companies in the world that are exceptionally vulnerable to exploits of this VxWorks issue. Now, they didn't publicly name any of these potential victims, but in an off-the-record part of our interview, we discussed them. And trust me, these are names that you would know. These are names that can move the GDP of nations. These are companies that could easily have tens of thousands of instances of VxWorks running within their network perimeters, and may or may not have a good way of doing remediation. So what kind of liabilities are we talking about? According to Cover, one of the theoretical companies that they did a theoretical company rather than naming an actual company, has a financial risk of over $7.2 billion because of this vulnerability. And when they applied the metrics to a much larger set of heavy industry, the liability came out to right at $19 billion. Now, the people who did this report feel confident that ultimately, eventually, in the fullness of time, the manufacturers who put the devices in the field will get it right and will patch them. The question is really whether someone or some organization is going to probe these manufacturing companies, find the vulnerabilities, and launch an attack before that happens. Now, this is not the sort of attack where you would easily say, get customer information, but it is entirely the sort of attack and vulnerability where you could put a manufacturer's processes on hold for an extensive period of time. Imagine major manufacturing facilities brought to a screeching halt and left there while their engineers try to figure out what's wrong, or while they try to figure out whether or not to pay the demands of the organization that had attacked. So this is the kind of thing that we're going to see in all likelihood more of as more of these OT, operational technology systems, hit the internet. Now, I want to turn to my co-hosts, and Brian, I want to ask you first, how do you protect yourself from a problem you don't know that you even have?
You know what? I'd love to answer that, but you know what? I think it's time we need to go to the next ad and talk about one of our sponsors. So I'm going to toss it to Lou, and then he'll toss it back to me.
Thanks, Cheever. Yeah, we do want to hear your answer for sure. But before we get to that fabulous answer, we do want to thank another sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage. Now, I've used Wasabi. They're a truly awesome company. You might be thinking, well, I use cloud storage, and the more I store in it, the more I access the data, or the more operations I perform on it, the more I get charged. Well, in this day and age, that's normally the story when it comes to cloud storage companies. But most cloud storage providers, they're really just competing for how low they can go on their storage fees and their ingress and egress fees. Now, Wasabi has a solution here. Now, from my experience, I can tell you that when you try to go cheaper on cloud storage and systems, you also potentially go down in performance and reliability as well. Well, Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage has a way to fix all of these things. Now, if you're doing small projects all the way up to large enterprise, Wasabi seems to have figured it out. Now, listen to this cost. Pricing of 0.0059 per gigabyte per month, or that's $5.99 per terabyte per month. Plus, listen to the game changer here. Unlimited free egress for your data and no charge for API calls. So you don't have to pay for actually accessing your data. Now check out what you're already paying right now on cloud storage, because I can tell you not having to include egress fees and API calls for those CRUD operations will substantially save you money on the cost of doing business. Now you're probably already thinking, well, if they're cheaper, they must be slower, or they don't have all the bells and whistles. Well, Wasabi has tackled all these things. In fact, they're using a disruptive technology. They found ways to pull raw performance out of their storage devices without compromising anything. They have a revolutionary process where they actually lay data down on disk sequentially as opposed to in blocks. And what happens is that Wasabi's storage is 80% cheaper and 6 times faster in speed from any of the industry leaders that are out there right now. Now, if your organization's worried about compliance, well, Wasabi also has an answer. They're HIPAA, FINRA, and CGS compliant as well. And in fact, anytime you talk about fast, cheap storage, it really isn't worth much if the data isn't secure. Well, Wasabi has an answer. They offer a unique feature of immutable buckets that cannot be deleted or altered, which protects your valuable data from accidental or malicious destruction. And you see if you can find any other service out there doing that today. I guarantee you can't now. Plus, they also add 90-day rotating integrity checks, and there are 11 nines of durability. Now, are you worried about data migration to the cloud? Well, Wasabi also has an answer there as well. They have the Wasabi Vault Transfer Appliance, and this thing is designed and powered by Netgear, and it's made to transfer large data sets while also dramatically reducing your costs. Now, you might already have cloud storage, or your organization has tried to store data on-premise to save money, or they want to partially move to the cloud in a hybrid scenario. Well, with Wasabi, you might be rethinking those approaches. Data storage is all Wasabi does. They are experts, it's their passion, and they believe that in the world of rapidly escalating cloud storage needs, that progress depends on cloud storage being more like a utility with fast, affordable storage available in endless supply. I bet you want to try this out right now. Go build something fun or move some of your data right now. They truly understand the needs of enterprises, so they don't have things like egress fees. Calculate your savings for yourself and start a free trial of unlimited storage for a month. Go to wasabi.com, click the free trial link, and enter the code ENTERPRISE. Join the movement and migrate your data to the cloud with confidence. Go to wasabi.com and make sure to use the offer code ENTERPRISE. And we thank Wasabi for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. All right, Brian, let's hear this fabulous answer.
Okay, so one of the problems is almost none of the network monitoring systems out there actually support the advanced MIBs, the SNMP MIBs, that will pull down the operating system and operating system version from switches, routers, and various other embedded devices. Big problem. Now, I will say that one of the monitoring systems, we actually interviewed Tim Titus, and we actually did an episode of Cheebert's Kitchen, well, actually 5 episodes, where we started talking about going in depth into things. Well, I would say if you are a network engineer, not network manager, and you're worried about this and you want to find out, download a MIB Walker. Because I'll tell you, unless you're running something like Path Solutions from Total View from Path Solutions, or you're running something like EM7 from Science Logic, which, oh, by the way, is next week's guest, you're not going to be able to easily get to those OS MIBs. But if you're running just a simple, and I believe a lot of them are free, MIB Walker, as long as you have the SNMP read-only password, you can actually go and start querying your network devices and other devices on your network and find out what kind of operating system you're running. Now, here's the part 2 of the answer. Sadly, unless you have some people working for you that actually know how to do things like TFTP upgrades, most of our chat room, they're network professionals. They know how to do TFTP upgrades. But the problem is we don't always have a true network professional working in every size organization. TFTP upgrades can be kind of picky. You have to be most of the time on the same subnet. You have to worry because TFTP is not a real secure protocol, but you've got a lot of steps to do it. So even when VxWorks goes and patches these things, upgrading them can sometimes be problematic, especially when you start getting into programmable logic controllers, things that control fans, air conditioners, rudders on ships, you name it. A lot of these run VxWorks, but the problem with a lot of the PLCs out in the world is they don't have a ton of RAM. And because of that, you actually have to go through a very, very aggressive process to do upgrades for the VxWorks operating system. You literally have to go through and blow it away so that there's nothing on it, so there's enough room for the new version of the operating system, and then swap it, if there is actually enough RAM, and go forth from that. Some of the devices out there in the world have so little extra RAM to play with that you actually have to go in and reprogram the proms. So that means you actually have to get in there and put in what is, in essence, a prom programmer to replace the operating system and upgrade it. So the bottom line is some devices are actually going to be so expensive to upgrade that either corporations are going to leave them in place, they're going to try and hide them behind firewalls or something like that, or natted firewalls especially, or they're just going to throw them away and get something new that doesn't have that vulnerability. So that's going to be a really big problem, and finding them is going to be challenging.
You mentioned that challenge, and I actually want to come back to you on that because there are a couple of other bits and pieces of that I want to discuss. But before I do, Lou, I wanted to ask you, when you hear of an issue like this, we know that ultimately this is the customer's responsibility to take care of, because it's sitting in their process, it's sitting on their premises. But how much responsibility do you think the manufacturers bear for something like this? Do you think a case can be made that these device vendors or system vendors should be out there being very aggressive in patching their devices and pushing out the updates, even if it means putting some sort of technician in the field to make the change on a device where they don't have an easy upgrade process?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think it is a little bit of both. I think, a lot of corporations and people and consumers give a hard time to people, companies like Apple and Microsoft, who tend to push out their changes and their annoyances, and they update your machine. But in the same sense, you'd be surprised in how fast it starts to reduce the number of vulnerabilities that are out there in the wild. And I think from a hardware manufacturer perspective, a lot of organizations today are doing very similar techniques. There are a lot of these router technology companies and a lot of IoT companies. They're building in mechanisms to allow for auto upgrade, behind the scenes upgrade, mechanisms that kind of allow for them to push the changes out, so they can propagate those changes, those fixes, and fix those vulnerabilities before they become a really big widespread issue. And so I'd say partially it is a manufacturing side issue, especially when like you said, you might have on-premise organizations where they don't have access to the internet, they can't be pushed these changes. Well, then there should be processes in place, like you said, maybe send out technicians and to apply those updates, or even provide a way to have an internal update server that allows updates to get pushed to, and then they can slowly roll them out at the speed that they want to roll them out. So I think there's lots of different mechanisms to do this, and I think manufacturers should spend more time and money on that when it comes to actually building these things. Now, you're also talking about a lot of legacy devices here. So sometimes they weren't built in mind of, we need to constantly keep them updated and have them cloud connected and continuous upgrade. upgrade as a service, if you will. And I think that means then they have to go back and review their processes and make sure that they're contacting customers. Like I have a router at home, and I get emails all the time saying, "Hey, it looks like you haven't upgraded in a while. Why don't you make sure you take a look at this stuff, right? Make sure you signal your customers, make sure that they're aware that they need to be done, and that you're communicating it." So I think there's lots of ways to do this, lots of campaigns to do it for sure.
Well, Brian, I've got one more question. Lou alluded to these other devices, and VxWorks, as you say, is probably the most popular, most widely used operating system, but we know that it's not the only one. How common do you think this kind of problem is out there? Is this something where a company could go through, scan for VxWorks, take care of those issues and feel like they were completely covered? Or do you think there are other similar problems like that just waiting to be discovered?
Oh, boy, that's a loaded question. The reality is that giant DNS DDoS attack against Dyn Corporation, I think it was 2 years ago now, was actually because of people cutting corners. Now, we're up at what? I think the 2.7 version of the kernel for Linux. Problem is, a lot of these IoT devices out there, especially, the really inexpensive webcams that are out there, some of these are down at the 1.8 version of the Linux kernel. Can we say massive numbers of vulnerabilities? So, yeah, Mibwalker again. Is it running Linux? Is it running a reasonably modern version of the kernel? Because we've got vulnerabilities right at the kernel. So this is the same kind of problem as VxWorks. We're going to have lots and lots of VxWorks devices out there that are on isolated networks. Like, for instance, I'm doing a lot of stuff with smart meters, measuring power usage in buildings and labs and things like that. I've got some switches that are aggregating, from a single data jack up to multiple meters, and that's running VxWorks. So you can just betcha I'm going to go in and find out what version of VxWorks is on there. So yeah, there's an awful lot. Here's the trick. I've got this old saying: you get what you pay for, and if you are buying, in the industry, we kind of call them tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 devices. Tier 1 are the big name brands, the ones that you buy from blue chip stock. They spend a lot of time and money developing their own version of the operating system. It might be based on Linux, but it's their own hardened version. Then there are tier 2 where they've gone, they haven't gone quite as far because they haven't really developed their own hardware. They're using OEM style hardware from different places, the white box stuff, and then relabeling it, but they're still doing their own version of the operating system. And then sadly, there's a lot of tier 3 devices out there. The Interop trade show actually ran into several of them, and one of the problems we ran into on one of those tier 3 switches was we actually found out that the VxWorks operating system, in our case, was allowing leakage from the management interface onto the production network. We were not pleased, and so we did a tech report and sent that up to VxWorks and heard nothing back.
Well, I think that this is one of those issues that we'll hear about again, because more and more industrial process systems are being put on the internet for various reasons. The old air gap defense just isn't as pervasive as it once was. But that pretty much does it for this bite. Lou, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Curt. Now, nowadays you hear a lot about breaches that are going on, but they're somewhat complex, right? Because you hear things like, we've heard of sleepers on networks finding vulnerabilities and vulnerable nodes in the network, then to siphon data out of the network. Or you hear about hacker groups using campaigns to attack an organization through social techniques or malware. But for some reason, we still seem to hear about these issues as well. These particular issues I'm speaking about is a researcher from VPN Mentor found a publicly accessible database containing almost 28 million records, including plain text passwords, face photos, and personal information that we use to secure buildings around the world. And according to VPN Mentor, the 23 gigabyte database contained more than 27.8 million records used by BioStar to secure customer facilities. Now, the data included usernames, passwords, and user IDs in a plain text, including access logs, employee records, including start dates, personal details, mobile device, and face images. The more surprising thing here is that most of the accounts that they saw they were able to gain their passwords there were actually simple ones like password or ABCD1234. Now, the researchers said that the data also included more than 1 million records containing actual fingerprint data as well. Okay, I don't think I even need to go on here. I want to throw it over to you guys first. I'll start with Curt. Curt, why is this still happening in this day and age? This seems like a thing that should have gone away a long time, especially databases that have such data, all this data in one spot. It's unencrypted. And they're still storing passwords in there. What's going on here? Why are we still seeing this?
Well, I think we're seeing it because, among other things, we're finding that configuring a database, especially configuring a database that's in a public cloud, is evidently a far more complex process than the public cloud providers would like to have us believe. I mean, think about the number of misconfigured S3 buckets that have been at the root of exposures. This is the kind of thing that, you're right, it shouldn't happen. These are things where you should have to take very positive action to do it badly. And here's the secret. In many cases, you do. But what you have is people who will do things like want to share with one colleague, want to share with one coworker, want to share with one contractor. And in doing that, they make it public for everyone and then never turn it off. So what you have are these failures of thought, failures of imagination, and ultimately those lead to failures of security in very profound ways.
I like that. I do agree. I think you're right. I think it is a little bit of experience and education when it comes to storing things and the complexity of doing things. But there are some baseline techniques nowadays when developing services, when they say, hey, when you have important data like this, it shouldn't be stored together. So you shouldn't be storing credentials along with information about the user, or you shouldn't be storing fingerprint data in a database where it can also contain information where they live and who they are. So I think this is just baseline fundamental principles that you should be following when you're storing data, especially in a database or data storage, cloud storage. Another thing is, obviously, they talked about a little bit about how they have information about username and passwords. Well, obviously, this doesn't make any sense to do it in plain text anymore. I think you can ask pretty much any security expert out there that the best way to store that data is obviously to hash it, especially when you're transmitting biometric data. And you talked a little bit about having vendors or other organizations, third parties looking and accessing these databases. It's especially important when you're doing that as well. But it just doesn't make sense that we're still seeing this. Brian, I want to throw this over to you. What do you think? I think Curtis had a really good answer here. Do you think it's similar? Is there other things that are going on here that we just don't know about, that organizations are not doing to secure data like this?
Okay, first off, warning to our viewers: rant on. Okay, this, my personal opinion, is just mass stupidity on the part of the designers. I mean, this database, I'm actually looking through the organizations that had their records in this one database. Why do we have medical facilities in the same database as software developers, as workout gymnasiums, as home decorators, as food distributors, and car parks? Why? In this day and age, was there one database with all these people with all these credentials? I mean, it's almost like someone was setting it up so that a hacker group can get into, large hospitals or free parking or get into a gymnasium for free. This is really bad. This is really, 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 really bad design, and I'm sure a lot of the people in the chat room will agree with me. I mean, PC Guy 8088 is saying 1Password does it all, tongue in cheek. Yeah, that's pretty bad. So to the corporation that designed this, I'm sorry, you guys, this is a big, giant boo-boo. You're going to need to fix it. And I think you're going to need to do some really serious fence mending with your big customers.
It sounds like, this is an identity provider, right? You're talking about biometrics. You think that they would be held to some level of standard when it comes to being, this kind of security provider of substance. Like you said, there's a laundry list of organizations that were affected by this in the article. So definitely take a look at that. But I think the interesting thing here is, like you're pointing out, is it's just really kind of dumb to be able to say, hey, we're storing all this very particular data that it means access to very, very, very specific things, and it's using biometric data. So it doesn't make sense that they're not, they're not securing things. Curt, I want to throw this over to you. Is this really what compliance is supposed to help with? Is it supposed to ensure that things are secure in a specific way or in a specific location? And should it have helped here?
Well, let's understand, most regulations are not prescriptive in terms of the technology they require. What they are prescriptive about is the outcome, that the records be secured, and sometimes there are cases where they will take some technology as being, prima facie evidence of a good faith effort toward compliance. But still, this is exactly the kind of information that should be protected. And it really depends on the kind of business we're talking about as to which regulations might be coming into play. This being a lot of physical access, there are a bunch of regulations that probably won't come in because they involve typically customer, personal information. But what you can imagine is a company like this that is collecting and centralizing biometric data for a lot of different companies. They could very easily have databases that would fall under the jurisdiction of numerous regulatory regimes, from HIPAA to the various financial industries, even to schools. So it's the sort of thing where if you are a customer of a company who has a database breach like this, you better believe you should be on the phone with them, finding out in great detail what was in the database, what was breached, what was exposed, and last but not least, what they're doing about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the interesting thing here is, I just keep hoping that researchers like this continue to scale, continue to actually create markets in research to be able to determine if there's vulnerabilities and to point those vulnerabilities out to the corporations and organizations. I think this is a really great pattern that we're seeing. We're seeing lots of organizations starting to hire on researchers that do searching and scanning and, pick out vulnerabilities that might have been kind of placed there years ago, and hardware that has been there from years ago, databases that have been there from years ago, but they're doing the research, they're doing their job. They get paid just to do that, just to go and find bad things. And I think that this will definitely help with the market and organizations going forward. So I'm hoping that at the very least that continues to happen. We'll have to see what happens. Well, folks, we're running out of time, and I think and I know that you've done it again. You've sat through another hour of the best dang enterprise podcast, according to 9 out of 10 Alice and Bob Bluetooth devices. But I also want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, and especially my co-host in crime, whom I would not want to do this show without them. Starting with our very own geek in paradise, Mr. Brian Chee. Cheebert, where can the folks find you, all of your work, and how can they pitch you some ideas?
Well, I listen to Twitter, and I'm ADVNETLAB, Advanced Net Lab. Love to hear your suggestions. If you follow me, you can probably also see a bunch of different tweets from Padre. He's still tweeting from Rome. Anyway, I'm also Cheebert at twit.tv, or better yet, why don't you send email to TWiET at twit.tv, and that'll hit all the hosts. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your show suggestions. And we've got lots of really interesting guests coming up in the future. Hope to see you there.
Thanks, Cheebert. We also thank our very own Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, where can the folks find you, all of your work, all the stuff that you're putting out there?
Well, as always, they can find my writing at Dark Reading, and especially starting this week in a section of Dark Reading we call The Edge. That's where I'm going to be looking at topics in some more depth. I'm going to be doing more interviews, more case studies. It should be interesting. Go to Dark Reading, look for the little blue button near the top that says The Edge. Come on over and see me and let me know what you think about the section. Of course, I'm also pointing to all of my articles on Twitter at KG4GWA. And if you're really lucky, you can catch me on Instagram talking about tech or tacos or something else entirely on Instagram at Curt_Franklin.
Fantastic. Thank you, Curt. Well, also, we have to thank you as well. You're the person that drops in each and every week to listen and to watch our show to get your enterprise goodness for the week. And we want to make it easy for you to watch and listen to the show and get your enterprise news for that week. Go out right now to our show page, twit.tv/TWiET. There you'll find all the amazing back episodes, plus all the show notes, co-hosts, guest information, plus links to the stories that we're doing in the show. And more importantly, next to the videos, you'll get those helpful download or subscribe links. Now, support our show by getting your audio version, video version, or HD video version of your choice, and listen on any one of your devices, on any one of your podcast devices, our apps as well. Now, after you subscribe, we want you to share with our coworkers, friends, family, whoever. You support our show by subscribing. So go out and do it right now and share it with everybody. Now, after you subscribe, also remember we do this show live each and every week at 1:30 p.m. Pacific on Fridays at live.twit.tv. Come see how the show is run. Come see the behind the scenes, how the sausage is made. Now, if we're gonna go jump in the show live and watch the show live, you might as well jump into our chat room live as well. irc.twit.tv. Now, we love our chat room. We have some great characters in there. We got some great questions and some great discussion points from the chat room. So please jump in. If you're going to watch the show live, you might as well be in the chat room as well. Now, also, don't you forget, you can follow me at twitter.com/Lewim. I'm there. I post all my work that I do at Microsoft, as well as what I do during the week and on weekends, all the different projects. I'm actually going to start posting about my Raspberry Pi 4 experiences out there very soon. Of course, you can also check out dev.office.com. There we post all the latest and greatest that we do to help you customize Office and make it more productive for you and your organization. I also want to make sure I thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to Leo and Lisa. They continue to support us each and every week to support us doing this free enterprise tech, and we couldn't do the show without them. Also, thank you to all the engineers at TWiET. Thank you so much for all your support, and of course, thank you to Mr. Brian Chee. Cheebert, he is our loyal, tireless producer who does all the bookings and the plannings, and we couldn't do the show without him. Now, of course, we have to thank our TD for today before we sign off. Jeff, do you have a camera on you at all? No?
Not today.
Well, we have a tradition of this show, and I thought I'd extend the tradition to you as well, that we asked the TD of what was the actual main topic of today's show?
The main topic is passwords should be kept out of public accessible databases.
Oh, I would say you were really close, really close. I would say vulnerabilities that should just not happen, but maybe next time, Jeff. Maybe next time. All right, thank you. Maybe next time. All right, well, until next time, I'm Louis Maresca, just reminding you, if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep TWiET.